I am here in Kalmar having a walk and talk with Annalisa Bolin.
Yes, whose name sounds Swedish but is not Swedish.
And we are here to talk about heritage future and also difficult heritage.
Yes.
Which is your research interest. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do for research?
Yeah, so I'm either an anthropological archaeologist or an archaeological anthropologist, depending on who I'm talking to. And I study heritage, so I'm particularly interested in how people today work with and manage and use the remnants of the past. So the archaeology comes in with the stuff from the past, and the anthropology comes in with what people are doing with it today.
Yeah.
And my specific area of study is for, 8 years now, I have studied post-conflict heritage in Rwanda.
Yeah.
And especially what the Rwandan government has done with heritage since the genocide. And I'm also working on a project now that has to do with the repatriation of heritage, specifically human remains, from German museums to Rwanda.
How did you fall into that? Was it something that you just by accident?
No, it wasn't really by accident. It was when I started doing work on heritage studies, I was interested in the politics of it particularly.
Yeah.
And in situations of post-conflict countries or societies, the politics are really heightened. They get very intense. And heritage it gets a lot of pressure put on it. So for example, in Rwanda, one of the uses of heritage since the genocide is as a mechanism for unifying the country. Yeah. The idea being that if you can unify the country, then you can prevent the return of divisions like those that led to the genocide.
Yeah.
So that means heritage in that context is incredibly important, and the politics are very intense. Yeah. So it's not that I came to difficult heritage by accident or anything. It was that the things I was interested in were the strongest, the most intense in those contexts.
Yeah.
Can cultural signifiers be political? Yeah, of course. Now and probably always about which signifiers are appropriate, which actually reflect us, which don't reflect us, which reflect only certain parts of our culture, certain regions, certain classes. So, I mean, at the same time as you can talk about there being an American culture, it's also a very divided country, and there are many American cultures too.
Yes.
And so when you're talking about can it build a Rwandan culture? Well, there's already a Rwandan culture, right?
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things that I've been looking at in my research for all this time is, since the Rwandan government is involved in this process of creating what they call the New Rwanda, since 1994, what are the signifiers and the origins of those signifiers and the things that they're identifying as meaningful to the New Rwanda, and what are they trying to establish as they're remaking this country in a deliberate effort to change it and to improve it, to make it better, in theory. What are the things that they're choosing in order to do that? What elements of culture, and how are they trying to tweak culture and change it?
And what have they done?
So I mentioned the unifying efforts.
Yeah.
There's this there are kind of two elements to that. There's cultural heritage, especially pre-colonial cultural heritage, and that's supposed to be aspirational. So the story is that prior to colonization, which was first the Germans and then the Belgians, prior to colonization, Rwanda was united in a monarchy. It was a nation that shared a language, shared an identity, shared all sorts of cultural markers. And the story is that then the arrival of colonizers really destroyed a lot of this unity, imposed ethnic divisions, and that enabled genocide. So in museums and in efforts to revitalize pre-colonial culture, there's this aspirational culture. So there's the positive culture, trying to bring back things that have been lost, trying to restore things that were taken away by colonialism.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, there's negative heritage. So that's especially these genocide memorials.
Yeah.
And negative heritage is the reminder of what happens if that attempt to reestablish Rwandan society as powerful and united, if that fails. So you have kind of the carrot and the stick. You have the thing you're reaching for using cultural heritage, and the thing that threatens you.
Yeah.
This reminder of what could happen.
Yeah. But is the situation extra complex in these cases in the African continent due to the colonization?
Oh yeah, I mean, colonization.
Because right now you're working with German artifacts.
Well, so I'm working with Rwandan artifacts that are held in Germany.
Yes.
So I'm working with a collection of, not artifacts actually, human remains, a collection of hundreds of Rwandan skulls that were taken for German ethnographic study in the early 20th century.
So during the colonization period.
Yeah, during the colonial period. And this was part of the very widespread project at the time of studying human races, quote unquote race science. And these things were stolen from all sorts of colonies all over the world. And this is just one particular collection that is held in Berlin. But there's a joint German-Rwandan project to research the collection and potentially return it to Rwanda. So, yeah, I mean, colonialism had these impacts not only on sort of the social and political structures of the countries that were colonized, but also had these direct impacts on the heritage and the people and the ancestors of current Rwandans through things like taking human remains in this case, and often in many other cases taking all sorts of other artifacts, taking sacred objects, taking art, taking anything you get your hands on.
Yeah. And is that like, because you hear a lot about all of these collection in museums that create some sort of discussions of who they do belong to.
Yeah.
Is because of the sort of the area that you and I are in right now, we are Westerners. Do you think that we have a different idea compared to if we had not necessarily been the ones who had been the conquerors to some extent? That our heritage gives us a different feeling of either ownership or history of these artifacts.
Do you mean our relationship to stolen
Our own-
artifacts,
yeah.
or to our own artifacts?
Yeah, well, to artifacts that we have in the collections that originate somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, some of the debate about repatriation and some of the arguments, especially from Western museums that don't want to return things, the argument is by having these here, we're able to educate people, we're able to juxtapose objects from different cultures. In theory, this might teach tolerance. Yeah. So by letting us look at human diversity and the different ways that different cultures have engaged with the world, they argue that there's a real value to having these things next to each other in the same location. So this is one of the arguments that places like the British Museum, of course, which famously refuses to repatriate anything, that places like the British Museum have used to say they can't return this stuff. And I think as beneficiaries of this colonial project, Western museum goers tend to kind of take this stuff for granted, kind of not think about it too much. You just say, it is fantastic to be able to see this stuff. Like, I admit it, like, I love to see stuff from different cultures and time periods, and it's great that I get to see that. But that doesn't mean that my personal interest in seeing these things can or should override the fact that they were looted or stolen or taken in various ways without consent from people who in many cases want this stuff back and are trying to assert their claims to objects now in the public arena and to assert their claims to their own culture and their own culture's heritage in ways that weren't so common before, a few decades ago.
Yeah. It's a complex subject.
Yeah, and I think there are, there are thoughtful arguments on every side of this.
Yeah.
I just personally tend to find it more compelling when people from places like Rwanda say this stuff was taken without consent and we'd like it back. I find that argument more compelling than, well, I really like to see it though.
And we had it for so long.
Yeah. And there are people who say, if we return things now, that's going to empty museums. That will be the end of museums as we know it. Well, maybe we should rethink museums as we know them.
Yeah. Also, we pass heritage all the time, both the good and the bad.
Yeah.
We just sometimes tend to pave over the bad.
Yeah, I think heritage can be very difficult and very painful in the ways that difficult or painful heritage is interpreted can be very different. So it could be very foundational, for example, to a national identity, as when we're talking about the genocide memorials in Rwanda. Or it could be something that's very much erased and not thought about. So I'm thinking, for example, of heritage of slavery in the U.S. in certain segments of society just really don't want to talk or think about it. And would much prefer to sort of erase that history. And so all these monuments having to do with the Confederate past in the U.S. have become very contentious because of the different ways that people interpret them or want them or don't want them to be in the public sphere.
But is that because we learn from heritage?
Yeah.
What is right and what is wrong? And is there such a way of having a way to display heritage in a wrong manner?
Is there a way to display heritage in a wrong manner? That's a really interesting question.
Because, if we take the Confederates, there's the ones that says, well, it's a part of our heritage. And then there's another side that goes like, yeah, but it should not be on display because it sort of undermines
or
their efforts.
Or it's, is kind of a violence in the public sphere against certain groups of Americans. Yeah, I do think this has to do with what people think heritage does and what they want it to do. So some people think that it's, valuable to have this kind of painful heritage in the public sphere just because it starts conversations. And then others might argue it's valuable to have this heritage in the public sphere because it's just our past, it's just who we are, we shouldn't get rid of it. And then there's still others who think it's, painful and continues to exert structural violence against people who have suffered in the U.S. for a long time. And I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer to that because I think that's something that has to be negotiated sort of case by case and society by society.
And since society changes, can it be that one of the discussions that we are having right now about whether it's right or wrong to have Confederate statues will change as time change?
Yeah, and
how do you then future-proof?
It's very changeable, and I think that's good. I think that's the purpose. Sometimes we think of heritage as just freezing the past and a bias toward preserving things like we should keep it just because it's old. And actually, that's a very uncommon position among academic heritage scholars. So I've never met people who are more pro-destruction than heritage scholars because this bias towards preservation is not really that prevalent in academic heritage because of this emphasis on what does heritage do, what is its place in society, and this constant negotiation. It's always, heritage isn't really about the past, it's about the present. It's about what we do with things now, or potentially about the future, what we preserve for people to use in the future. And those are always sort of ongoing changing processes.
So what inspires you to continue to do science?
So I thought about this question a lot.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that I think my answer is really boring because my answer is I have been so incredibly lucky to be able to just say, here's a question that interests me and I'm going to study it.
So it's curiosity.
It's curiosity, yeah. And it's trying to figure out what the patterns are in the world, what are the hidden dynamics that are producing those and pushing those, and how are they assembled by people or by societies, by cultures? And what are the factors that go into that? So it's not just a descriptive project, it's about looking at what goes into the background that goes into what we see, the manifestations in the world around us.
Then I just want to say thank you.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it was really nice, right?
Yeah.
It sounds lucky with the weather.
We're blessed. This is lovely.